Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Chapter 48, from the author. After 6 years of work, merciless toward myself and with almost continuously tense mentation, I yesterday at last completed the setting down on paper in a form I think accessible to everybody. The first of the 3 series of books I had previously thought out and 6 years ago begun. Just those 3 series in which I plan to actualize by means of the totality of the ideas to be developed, at first in theory and afterwards in practice, also by a means I had foreseen and prepared, 3 essential tasks I had set myself, namely, by means of the first series, to destroy in people everything which in their false representations, as it were, exists in reality, or in other words, to corrode without mercy all the rubbish accumulated during the ages in human mentation. By means of the second series, to prepare, so to say, new constructional material, and by means of the third, to build a new world. Having now finished the first series of books, and following the practice already long ago established on the earth, never to conclude any great, as is said, undertaking, without what some call an epilogue, others an afterword, and still others from the author, and so on. I also now propose to write something of the same kind for them. With this end in view, I very attentively read over this morning the preface I wrote 6 years ago, entitled The Arousing of Thought. In order to take corresponding ideas from it and for a corresponding, so to say, logical fusion of the beginning with this conclusion, which I now intend to write. While I was reading that first chapter, which I wrote only 6 years ago, but which seems to me by my present sensing to have been written long, long ago, a sensing which is now in my common presence, obviously because during that time I had to think intensely and even, as might be said, to experience all the suitable material required for 8 thick volumes. Not for nothing is it stated in that branch of genuine science entitled The Laws of Association of Human Mentation, which has come down from very ancient times and is known to only a few contemporary people, that the sensing of the flow of time is directly proportional to the quality and quantity of the flow of thoughts. Well then, while I was reading just that first chapter, about which, as I said, I thought very deeply from every aspect, and which I experienced under the most exclusive action of my own willed self-mortification, in which, moreover, I wrote at the time when the functioning of my entire whole, a functioning which engenders in a man what is called the power to manifest by his own initiative, was utterly disharmonized. That is to say, when I was still extremely ill, owing to an accident that had not long before occurred to me, and which consisted of a charge and crash with my automobile at full speed into a tree standing silently, like an observer and reckoner of the passage of centuries at a disorderly tempo, on the historic road between the world capital of Paris and the town of Fontainebleau. A charge which, according to any sane human understanding, should have put an end to my life. There arose in me from the reading of that chapter a quite definite decision. Recalling my state during the period of the writing of that first chapter, I cannot help adding here, owing to still another certain small weakness in me which consists of my always experiencing an inner satisfaction whenever I see appear on the faces of our estimable contemporary, as they are called, representatives of exact science, that very specific smile peculiar to them alone, that although my body after this accident was, as is said, so battered and everything in it so mixed up, that for months it looked like a fragment of a general picture which might be described as a bit of live meat in a clean bed. Nevertheless, and for all that, my correctly disciplined, what is usually called spirit, even in that physical state of my body, was not in the least depressed, as it should have been according to their notions, but on the contrary, its power was even intensified by the heightened excitation which had arisen in it just before the accident, owing to my repeated disappointment in people, particularly in such people as are devoted, as they say, to science, and also to my disappointment in those ideals which until then had been in me, and which had gradually been formed in my common presence, thanks chiefly to the commandment inculcated in me in my childhood, enjoining that the highest aim and sense of human life is the striving to attain the welfare of one's neighbor, and that this is possible exclusively only through the conscious renunciation of one's own. And so, after I had very attentively read over that opening chapter of the first series, which I had written in the said conditions, and when in my memory, by association, there had been recalled the texts of those many succeeding chapters, which according to my conviction ought to produce in the consciousness of the readers unusual impressions, which in turn always, as is said, engender substantial results. I, or rather this time, that dominant something in my common presence, which now represents the sum of the results obtained from the data crystallized during my life, data which engender, among other things, in a man who has, in general, set himself the aim, so to say, to mentate actively, impartially, during the process of responsible existence, the ability to penetrate and understand the psyche of people of various types, I decided, urged by the impulse called love of kind, which simultaneously arose in me, not to write in this conclusion anything additional and correspondent to the general aim of this first series, but to confine myself simply to appending the first of a considerable number of lectures, copies of which now are in my possession, and which were publicly read during the existence of the institution I had founded, under the name of the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. That institution, by the way, no longer exists, and I find it both necessary and opportune, chiefly for the purpose of pacifying certain types from various countries, to make the categorical declaration here and now that I have liquidated it completely and forever. I was constrained with an inexpressible impulse of grief and despondency to make this decision to liquidate this institution and everything organized and carefully prepared for the opening the following year of 18 sections in different countries. In short, of everything I had previously created with almost superhuman labor, chiefly because soon after the said accident occurred, that is, 3 months afterwards, when the former usual functioning of my mentation had been more or less re-established in me, I, being still utterly powerless in body, I then reflected that the attempt to preserve the existence of this institution would, in the absence of real people around me, and owing to the impossibility of procuring without me the great material means required for it, inevitably lead to a catastrophe, the result of which, among other things for me in my old age, as well as for numerous others wholly dependent on me, would be, so to say, a vegetation. The lecture which I propose to append as a conclusion to this first series was more than once read by my, as they